Then moving over to East Charlotte, we have the Windsor Park, Winterfield, and Idlewild area that were in the original bond for relief. And because the relief site is located on Farm Pond Lane in the current Albemarle Road Elementary School boundary, we also have an opportunity there to relieve this additional school, Albemarle Road. Feeder middle schools in this area are Albemarle Road Middle School, McClinton and Eastway, and high schools, Independence, East Mecklenburg, and Geringer. In addition, we are having conversations about what it would look like to include Charlotte East Language Academy into this scenario. Lastly, for the elementary schools, we're going down to the Ballantyne area, and we have in the original bond, Elon Park, Hawk Ridge, and Polo Ridge elementary schools. Since then, Polo Ridge has already been relieved, so they are no longer going to be affected by the student reassignment, but we do have an opportunity to add in Ballantyne Elementary School, which is currently overutilized, and so they have an opportunity to be relieved as well. Here, the relief site is located down the street from Elon Park Elementary in the Elon Park current school boundaries. And feeder middle schools to this area are Community House and J.M. Robinson, and the high school here is Ardrey Kell. So give an overview about what we have accomplished so far, and that process is parallel with all of the elementary schools. So we start off by sharing our initial ideas with principals and learning community superintendents, and we really engage them throughout the process so they on what is happening and they can give feedback in an ongoing fashion. We also share with community members in a community session that was virtual, and from there we start building scenarios. We start building maps and looking at the planning capacity, calculating things like the SES and how that would be changed when we shift these boundaries. And then we present that to the community in a second session and obtain feedback based on what our draft scenarios could look like. We also, for all the schools, launched a crowdsourced mapping tool in which parents and other community members can go online and draw boundaries that they see fit in the relief school areas and give us some input written as well in terms of why they drew those boundaries and how they see that's a good fit for the area. So we collect all that information in addition to other online feedback that we receive. And from there on, what we're doing right now in the next couple of months is putting together an FAQ document, some of the frequently asked questions, making sure those answers are readily available on our website. We're also doing in-person community engagement because we know that virtual sessions don't work for everyone. So we show up at PTA meetings and spring carnivals and whatever kind of events are happening in the area and engage parents in that way. We will continue to have community sessions in May, and we're also conducting on-the-ground neighborhood evaluations where we go to the physical sites, the relief schools. We look at what the boundaries look like right now and what they could look like in the draft scenarios to see if it makes sense on the ground. Because it's one thing to look at it on a map, but it's very different sometimes when you're on the ground. And when we do these site visits, we go with people who live and work in the area so they can give us an extra layer of insights in terms of what community aspects we should be looking at. So as of now, we are still scheduled to be able to present a final scenario and have that uploaded as a board recommendation by the end of May, with a public hearing and board recommendation on the June 14th and the final board vote on June 28th. Here, just an overview of some of the sessions that we have coming up in case people want to join us, and we will also be posting additional in-person engagement on our website. So before I transition to the high school relief, I'd like to accept any questions, if there are any at this time, about the elementary schools.
And just to keep things flowing, we're going to do 60-second questions or feedback. The answer doesn't have to fit in the 60 seconds, but we'll do one round of 60 seconds each, and then if the board wants to do additional rounds of questions, we can do that. And I will start with you, Mr. Munoz.
Thank you. And hi, I have two quick questions. So the first one is about the community engagement activities. Are these events available in other languages that are not English, especially for?
Yes, yes. So I was actually on a call with the person leading the interpretation on the way over, and we have, for instance, for upcoming events, on Saturday, we have interpreters available for Spanish, French, Burmese, and Nepali, and any additional languages that are requested by the school, we have available for in-site interpretation, as well as translation of the documents.
I think that's great, especially with elementary schools that are so diverse in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just another question, but it's mainly me being curious, and it's how many students will?
We'll come around for the second question.
All right, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Mr. Strain?
Hi, thank you. On the elementary relief schedule, one of the things that obviously we look at in terms of planning boundaries is the matriculation path, right, the feeder patterns. And at least for the southwest, or sorry, the south elementary school relief, those feeder patterns at the high school level have not yet been determined. So how do we work the south elementary school relief on that calendar, right, with that plan, when we don't know the boundaries yet for the high schools and thus can't take into account those feeder patterns?
Yes, good question. So the plan right now is to make sure that we finalize the boundaries for the elementary schools first, and then we can take that into consideration when we're planning for the high school.
He was the second.
Okay. So it's not possible to actually look at those together because both will impact one another. I'll hold that, but that's the request of the community and their representative, is that we actually consider those things together as we're drawing them, as opposed to we'll set one based on some set of criteria, which includes an assumption about the other. Thank you.
Yes, well, since those processes are happening parallel, we are in communication with, we are doing cross-communication between those two processes, but we're still, I guess, considering around the timeline and what that would actually look like.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Ms. Ship.
Yes, and you may have talked about this some, but I'm really concerned about the communication process in terms of families and communities getting involved in these sessions. And I think that's so critical. And those who are the most impacted, are they getting the information? Are they getting involved in hearing about this, which is going to be their schools?
Yeah, so we work very closely with the principals and making sure that they're getting information out to their families. And we are specifically going to be looking more at the apartment complexes and areas, single-family homes, where the boundaries may potentially change, and really focusing in on those families. And not just in the planning process, but also throughout the process to opening. We've had conversations about making sure that all those parents get a warm handoff to whatever new school they will be going to.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall? Oh, I thought I saw your hand. Oh, Ms. Sawyer?
In the Windsor Park, Winterfield, or Albemarle Road, Hidden Valley, Greer Newell, are there opportunities to do some balancing of middle schools as we get into this, or is there some sort of low-hanging fruit where we've got middle schools that have capacity issues that we might balance at the same time?
That's a great question. Right now, the focus is on making sure that we are fulfilling the expectations of the 2017 bond. And so the elementary relief is really priority, but I do agree that it's important to be thinking about the bigger picture. And this ties into conversations we'll be having with you all shortly about the comprehensive student assignment review and what the exact scope of that should look like.
Any more questions? Anybody want to do a second round? We okay with the second round? Because I know Mr. Torres-Munoz had another question. Go for it.
But it's not really that important.
Pardon?
It's not really that important. It was just.
It's important. Ask your question. But turn on your mic.
I was just curious about, like, if we know the number of students that each new school is going to serve.
Typically, since it's a 45 classroom and we have an average of 20 students per classroom. This may change a little bit depending on the needs of the students and if we add any pre-K. So there are conversations about that, but that's the estimated capacity at each school.
Thank you.
All right, should we move on to high school?
Okay, so moving on to the high school relief site, which is a 100-classroom site located on North Community House Road, and that is in the current South Mecklenburg High School boundary. Feeder middle schools that are potentially impacted include Community House, J.M. Robinson, Quail Hollow, South Charlotte, Carmel, and Ray Farms, which is a K-8. And feeder elementary schools that are potentially impacted are Sharon, Old Providence, McAlpine, Hawk Ridge, Ballantyne, Pineville, End Haven, and then Ray Farms. So here the goals are relieving Ardrey-Kell, South Meck, and Myers Park. So in terms of the planning and engagement, there are some parallels here with what we do with the elementary schools. We engage learning community superintendents and principals throughout the process. We held a community session on March 1st, and based on that, we developed scenarios that we presented then back to the community on April 7th. That session was widely attended. Over 180 participants were on the call, and we received a lot of feedback in that call in addition to on the crowdsourced map. And we are using all that information to create, again, some FAQs documents that we can post on our website to make sure people have answers to their questions. And another thing that we learned in that meeting is that there are still a lot of questions and there are still a lot of concerns, and we really need to take our time to pay attention to all these concerns. And it is a big project, and we want to make sure that we're doing that justice. And so based on that, we are doing a variety of different activities and also hoping to have additional time for this. So one of the things that we've done is create a work group with representatives from people in the elementary, middle, and high schools in the area. And that work group will assist us in getting additional community input by having small group conversations throughout the area, doing cross-school engagement, so really looking at the broader picture and not just looking at school by school, and then also looking at giving feedback on our upcoming scenarios before we release those to the broader public in the community sessions. Again, we will make sure to post all materials on our website, so you can go ahead and find previous slides and materials, and we will continue to post them on here. Just another overview of the community efforts that we're putting into place right now, and additional on-the-ground evaluations, as with the elementary school sites. And then we are proposing to have the board vote, public hearing, board recommendation in the early months of 2023. This still allows for plenty of time for planning, since this school is not set to open until the fall of 2024. Are there any questions about the high school relief?
Mr. Torres-Munoz.
So I was explained that this new high school will work with grandfather law or rule. I don't remember the exact name, but it's that if someone went to one of the old schools, they can still go to these schools, right? And not the new one, but the one that they were attending to for a couple of years. And my question is, like, how will we get students to actually want to go to this new school, considering that Ardrey-Kell, South Meck, Providence, Myers Park are schools that already have like a lot of school spirit, and they want to still be part of their own school?
Yes, so excellent question. So the first one is looking at the grandfathering process, right? So we won't take students out, and this is according to board policy, not taking students out on their last year of high school, so they will be grandfathered into their school. In terms of what the relief school is going to look like, That planning process happens in the year, or in this case, year and a half leading up to it, where the principal and the new teachers will be identified and a curriculum for the offerings of the school. No doubt in my mind that this will be a prestigious school, as are the other high schools in the area, and we will make sure that it lives up to expectations that people have in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? All right.
Okay.
I am not seeing any more questions.
So just wrapping up, just to reiterate, we have started this process in March. We're going through and continuing collecting community input and data, and in June, we will be voting on the elementary school boundaries, but we will be taking additional time for the high school. So with that said, I will hand it over to my esteemed colleague and his supervisor to go over the magnet schools.
Thank you, Claire, and good evening, Madam Chair and board members. It's my honor and privilege to introduce you to Walter Hall, who is going to be sharing with you some of the early engagement and planning steps with regard to two specific schools that Mr. Schultz mentioned, being Lincoln Heights and E.E. Waddell. I do want to share with you just briefly that Walter is just returning from the annual Magnet Schools of America Conference, where he was nominated and elected the regional director for Region 4 for Magnet Schools of America. So he will be serving in that great leadership role, representing Ohio, Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Kentucky. So he brings with us to us a great wealth of experience and knowledge that we're happy that he'll have an opportunity to share with other regional states. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Walter Hall.
Good evening, board and superintendent. So I'm going to go through some of the general information around engagement in the process and just some general information about the schools so we can remind us what we're going to be talking about tonight. So first up is Lincoln Heights. It is a 39 classroom facility, and it is located in the West Charlotte area within the Bruns attendance area at 1900 Castle Street. And so this building will open in the fall of 2023. This will be a new magnet school. Then we have our second, which is E.E. Waddell. And E.E. Waddell will be a 71 classroom high school, and it is located at 7030 Nations Ford Road. And so it can seat up to 1,775 students. And this will be a high school, so these are high school students. And this building also will open in the fall of 2023, and this will open as a new magnet school as well. So one thing just to remind the public, and just based off of the guidelines that we prioritize socioeconomic diversity. And so that's one of the goals for student assignment, and so I just wanted to reference that. And so in our lottery process, our student assignment process, we do look at factors such as family income, highest level of education obtained, and household size. And so that's how we work to prioritize socioeconomic diversity. We also use the census block as a part of the formula to get that. And students get a priority in the lottery based on their data in those particular questions. So we are the first district in the country to work with MIT. And so we're working with Center for Constructive Communication. And it's just really 4 steps, making sure that we gather information from the public, that we facilitate conversations, just using some proven strategies, that we're listening to what the public is saying. It's really important. They've lifted that up, that they want to make sure that their voice is heard, and just sharing what we learn. So we want to really talk about the facts, being able to share how people feel, and just in general, just collect that information. Our magnet theme integration specialist, Marquita Mitchell, is the project manager for this, and she's leading this particular project. So just a quick glance at some of our engagement between March 19th and April 14th. So we had 14 conversations. We segmented these specifically into conversations for Lincoln Heights as well as E.E. Waddell. And so for Lincoln Heights, we've reached about 1,033 families via our email marketing. For E.E. Waddell, we reached up to 4,241. We use social media as well, and so we've had some impressions and interactions with families that are interested in E.E. Waddell, and so that number is 2,717. With Lincoln Heights, these are unique individual viewed posts, so people may have interacted with these posts a few times based on how many times they've seen it or how many times they went back to it. But for Lincoln Heights, we've had 1,244 unique interactions. And so this has been a mix of email, social media posts, as well as surveys. So 83 people have participated in our participant surveys. And so this is a quick glance of that information. So we have some conversation prompts that we are using to just gather information, test the temperature, and really understand how people feel. One of the first questions was just to give some information and background about who they are and just a memorable school experience that they felt excited about as a student. And so I'll play that for you. The next one was about school diversity. So this is another example of a particular prompt. And so we really focused on diversity and how people felt about diversity and why it would be important in the schools that they would select. And so we're talking about 2 different sites, and some of that information kind of synced and linked up. These conversations, we're going to be mapping all the information that comes from these particular conversations. So working with MIT, we're able to understand the commonalities of words that are being used or phrases that are being said or themes that may come about. And so they will we'll be able to see, like if you look at the top where you see students, that was one of the ones that just continued to come up. Students were at the forefront of the things and the discussions that we were discussing. And so as we continue to analyze that data, we'll be able to pick out the words or phrases that were most used in this analysis. On April 22nd, we started the next phase, which is CMS Voices, and it's actually Story Share. We have a website, which is cmsvoices.com, and so families that did not get a chance to participate in the conversations that were live, small group sessions via Zoom, they still have a chance to participate and give the feedback, and so they would do that via this website. And so this is very special and important because we're actually able to map where the information is coming from. So families will determine, or participants will determine if they're a CMS parent, if they're a staff member, if they're a student, if they're a community member. So we're able to categorize what type of feedback it is. They're able to determine what school they represent currently. So if they're at SAIL, or if they're at North Academy of World Languages, or if they're at University Park, there's a drop-down menu for them to be able to do that. And then they can provide specific feedback for which scenario or which school that they're interested in providing information for. And so we have 2, as I stated before, E.E. Waddell as well as Lincoln Heights. The second one is a screenshot. We're mapping where this information is coming from. And so what you see here on the screen are boundaries of the census maps or the census blocks. And so we're able to map that information well just to see who was participating, like how far away are they from the school? Where are we getting the most responses from? A way to just really analyze where all this data is coming from and make sure that families that may be impacted the most are having an opportunity to provide feedback and information, or giving us a chance to understand where we need to adjust our efforts for who may not be participating. or not be being reached. So I want to give you a brief timeline. So we started March 19th with the Local Voice Network conversations, and so all those are stored online. Families will have an opportunity to go and review review those conversations. We completed our last conversation April 14th. We decided that we may decide to have more because we do want to make sure that we have student voice, as well as making sure, as we look through our data, to make sure that every community is represented, especially those ones that are surrounding directly those particular schools. So we launched CMS Voices, which is our Story Share website, so they can collect information if they weren't able to participate in a conversation. Today is April 26th, which is our update about our process around these two schools. May 13th, we're going to complete our sense making. So that's a scientific term that's basically around data analysis. So looking at our website data that we've collected from the website, looking at our conversations that we've had and all the feedback that we're gathering around this process, and to just present a set of facts around these two schools based on the community feedback. Starting May 18th, we're going to lock ourselves down and we're going to use some feedback to inform a set of scenarios for each school. Starting May 24th, we're going to start and we're going to have a 12-day campaign. And so it's called Release Your Voice, Your Choice. So it'll be a public portal. And throughout those 12 days, we're going to have targeted campaigning and events around the energy around these two schools. We really want to make sure that people understand that we want to hear their voice, that there's an opportunity to participate, and just to provide feedback about what their hopes and dreams are for these two particular schools. We have a great opportunity in designing programming in these particular schools for our community. At June 10th, that 12 days will be over, so we'll end those opportunities for community feedback on the magnet scenarios that are presented. And then June 14th, we will share, the superintendent will share his recommendation, and we'll have a public hearing as well, board vote in June, and then starting July 1st, starting that planning process, because we will have about a year to get those schools up and running. So we'll need to do some research, some site visits, and things of that nature. So at this point, I would like to open it up to you all for any questions, and I'm here to answer those for you.
And we'll do the 60-second thing, but we'll do multiple questions if the board wants to go back and do multiple questions. All right, I see so many hands. I'm just going to start at the left and work my way around. Did I see your hand, Ms. Shipp? Yeah. Okay.
Lincoln Heights, it's always been kind of a passion for me, having been there most recently than before it closed. So I'm real concerned, and I think this is great. I want to say that, number one, so much work to get voices, community voices, parent voices. But my question would be, as we look at it being a full magnet, how does that affect those students in the neighborhood who we have several magnets, but a home school, a school that is their home? They know they're going to have that opportunity to go to that school. So I'm really concerned about the type of magnet we choose that fits the needs of that neighborhood.
So when we are choosing magnet schools, we do look at a number of different things. We want to make sure that programs don't cannibalize each other, right? So we don't want to have two stems that are within a mile within each other, right? So that's one thing that we want to look at. We want to look at our popularity around the themes that people are choosing. So we want to make sure that we're able to meet that need. So we're looking at waiting lists and things of that nature. The other thing is just making sure what is the community need as well. And so as we look at a separate school such as Lincoln Heights, we have to remember and understand that whatever we do in one school can kind of impact what's happening in the surrounding area. So in that particular area alone, we have Bruns, we have University Park, and then we have Lincoln Heights that's about 1.5 miles from University Park. So those are conversations that we cannot have in isolation. We are very aware of how one decision can impact another, and so we'll need to take a look at those scenarios as well, just making sure that we're looking at all the unintended consequences of a particular decision that we recommend or make.
That's very important. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Marshall and then Ms. Barzilli.
I've got a question on data. So we talked about our SES diversity, which I know sort of follows census data. Will we have an update on that type of data anytime soon? And will that play into the data that you're analyzing for these decisions and other decisions we're making within the next year and a half?
So for clarification, you're talking about data of the participants that are giving the feedback, or data around the students that would attend?
Students that would attend all those SES building blocks that we use to make all sorts of decisions here.
So I think we can give you an update as it is now. We can give you an update of the students that are in the area, in the particular census blocks. We do have that data. We do have that data.
Has it been updated since since the 2020 census?
We have not updated it just yet for the lottery purposes and things of that nature yet. We were delayed because that data was delayed coming out.
Right.
And so we would have to see if that is available for us at this time.
Okay.
Ms. Barzilli?
Thank you. Lincoln Heights is near and dear to my heart. I live right down the street from it. And I was distressed when they closed it, so I'm excited that we're opening it up again. And we're excited that it's going to be a magnet, because it was a magnet in past years. And we always looked to it as a neighborhood asset. What magnet are we looking at? What theme?
So we're really trusting the process right now. We want to make sure that we are gathering the community feedback, really understanding what they're saying. When we hear some of the families' feedback early, some people that live in the neighborhood, they are leaning more towards STEM. So what does that mean? We really need to dig into that. Is it a particular specialty? But we really want to make sure that we're analyzing that data and making sure that we are selecting the right theme. We do have a few STEMs in the area, and so we want to make sure, once again, that we're not cannibalizing programs, and that we have enough interest that we actually can draw students into that particular area. One of the purpose of our magnet programs is to make sure is that we socioeconomically diversify our student body, because we know that socioeconomic or diverse socioeconomic student bodies are going to create optimal learning environments for students.
We get more than one question?
We'll come back around.
Okay.
Ms. Sawyer?
Just a quick question, what's the website? Is it cmsvoices.com, and is it live now?
It is live, I believe, cmsvoices.org.
.org, okay. Thank you.
It is connected to CMS Choice, so you can get through it that way as well. Yes, if you're connected to our listserv, you should have gotten a email about that as well. So sign up for CMS Choice updates.
I don't think I saw Mr. Strain's hand. Okay, Ms. Delahara.
The information showing the families reached through MailChimp and the social media engagement, have we shown that before? I don't know that I've seen it. Is this new, this LVN?
The LVN is new, so that's our project working through MIT and the Center for Constructive
that's right.
Communication.
That's right. Okay.
We do use that information a lot. So we've used that for our lottery campaigns. We have over 20,000 families that have connected to us for updates. So we've been using that for about 3 years. We regularly have a social media calendar that kind of schedules out different events about different things that are happening in the magnet world and the magnet process. So we do use it a lot. We're always looking at different ways to reach different families. We know that each community is different, and so we have to approach them a little bit differently.
It'd be great to have comparison data over time to see how that changes and we can grow the engagement. in different communities and with the same school, but over different years. So interesting. Just a simple question. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Torres Munoz? No, no questions? Okay. So did we have some second rounds? We want to do a second round? Yeah? Okay.
I'm sorry, I think I
Ms.
asked a
Schiff and
second.
then Ms. Byers-Bailey.
I think mine's kind of on the same line before. I didn't really ask about, and I think this was asked, about the magnet school, really looking at the kind of magnet you put in, how it fits the needs of the community. And so it was an LITD magnet, and that's Learning Immersion Talent Development Magnet. And it did work for that community, and I'll just share that because I was there as a principal. It was very popular, one of our best magnets. And it really did fit the needs of the students. So I really hope we'll look at what fits. I know there's some STEM already in the area, so I think this would be a good diversity different type of magnet, but also meet the needs of the students. So has that been looked at in terms of the type of magnet that you would want to put there when you think about what students in that neighborhood would gravitate to and do well?
That's 60 seconds.
So we're very early in the process with the data. We want to make sure that we're honoring the process. We really want to make sure that we are trusting the process and listening to what the families are telling us. That is a reoccurring theme that we have heard in these conversations. I use STEM as an example. That is something that a lot of people will tend to throw out, but we want to make sure that we're truly trusting the process. So we're going to take a look at all the things and all the factors that will impact that particular decision before we bring some scenarios forward. We're also going to make sure during this 12 days, your 12-day Voice Your Choice campaign, there's going to be some in-person events that we're going to do to make sure that we are truly hearing the voices of the community that may not be connected to the technology. So we'll be at the libraries. We will be at some of the events. We'll be at the West Charlotte community event that will take place as well. And so that, as you know, that's right down the street. But we are truly trying to make sure that we are in tune and listening to what the community is saying before we release what those particular scenarios may be. We want to take that into account. That's very important to us.
Yes.
Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Thank you. Are all the schools, all the schools listed up there on the map, are they all in the violet zone, transportation zone?
So on this particular map for Lincoln Heights, there is a piece of Thomasboro, I believe, that may be in the blue zone, because Thomasboro falls in the West Meck feeder. So West Meck is split into two, blue and violet. I believe this is all violet. Ashley Park is a part of the right across the overlay, so it's right on the line. And so, yes, I do believe that all these particular schools would have access based the way our lottery logic is set up right now.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll ask a question. I forgot to give myself a chance. Well, first, I wanted to share that the tool that you're using that shows where voices are missing that's really fascinating. That is really fascinating. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out, how you are able to use that data and then go back and I don't know what you'll need to change in order to tap into those voices, but that's a fascinating tool. I'm glad you've found it. And then I'll just follow up on Ms. Marshall's question about census data, because we do get asked that a lot in the community. Do you know when the new census data will be available to update our SES numbers?
So I'll be working with my counterpart, Dr. Schultz, to understand that as we move forward, as we get ready for student assignment. I do not have an answer at this time when the new updated data will be available.
Okay.
As soon as I get that, I will forward that over to you.
Okay, great. Any more questions on this? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Going to get the what else?
will now move on to our student outcomes focused governance, our progress monitoring report on the theme. What we're checking in on tonight is AP and IB and Cambridge and dual enrollment advanced courses, and how we're tracking with that. And for anybody who's following along at home, I know this is it's hard to see all those words on the screen. So the report that we reviewed it in advance, and it is available on board docs for the public to review as well. So just a reminder, when we do these progress monitoring reports, we go, we use this time at the dais for strategic questions. Our clarifying questions, our tactical questions, those were asked in advance via email and answered in advance via email. We have Mr. Craybill joining us online tonight, and you all probably know him as the consultant we've been working with as we've moved through this student outcomes focused governance model. He typically shares some feedback at the end, but today I actually asked him to speak at the top of the meeting because, you know, things are different tonight. We have a new superintendent, and yet it is so important that we continue the work, not shift the work. We're not missing a beat. We're keeping a steady course on monitoring student outcomes. So with that, I'm going to invite Mr. Craybill on the screen if we're ready to do that.
Madam Chair.
And I'll share one more before you start, Mr. Craybill. I'm going to share one more thing that you'll note it's a little different tonight. As you know, when we've done these in the past, the superintendent asks all the questions. We direct the questions to the superintendent, not his staff. Since this is his second day on the job, we're going to switch that up tonight, and staff will be answering the questions. But I'm sure he'll be up to speed by next month. No pressure. And with that, I'll hand it off to you, Mr. Craybill, for your reflections before we dive in.
Actually, you largely stole all of my thunder in that the important thing that I wanted to communicate, to the board, that is that it is important, even in times of transition, that the board stay focused on the work that it's committed to doing. It sends the right message to the staff, and it demonstrates discipline, on the part of the board, that whatever the circumstances are, that we are going to continue to adhere to our monitoring practices, that we're going to constantly be interrogating the question of, are our students actually getting the blessing that they are owed by CMS? And the other item, again, which we've already mentioned, is that monitoring conversations are intended to be between the superintendent and the board. And so it's been appropriate that you've had just your superintendent responding, and that it's been a strategic conversation between the board and the superintendent. When you have a brand new superintendent, welcome, sir.
Thank you.
It does make sense to continue the monitoring, but your superintendent's going to probably need 2 or 3 months to get up to speed. And so I would certainly expect that this evening you'd have a combination of staff working with the board to go through the monitoring report. It's also helpful to know that there's some depth to the bench, that there are folks who can step up and speak to what are the academic strategies that the district is pursuing right now. But I would expect that your superintendent, if not next month, by the month after, definitely needs to be able to step up to the plate and speak to what are the strategic things that we're doing as a school system to move the needle for our students. As is always the case, if I can be supportive in any way, let me know. One of the things that's really made a difference with the quality of strategic conversation that you all have been having is when you all have done your work in advance. I cannot overstate the difference in the quality of your dialogue from when you all have done preparatory work and when you all have not. So I just wanted to certainly give a shout out to the board members who did reach out this week to get support with some of your questions and just really, prepare so that you can serve children as effectively as possible. To the rest of the board members, just know that I am a resource and glad to be available to work through the monitoring reports with you and help you hone and refine your questions. So a few key things as you all get started. This is supposed to be strategic conversation, so technical questions and tactical questions really should have been asked in advance. So to the extent that you have those, you've largely waived the opportunity to deep dive into those if that's not a conversation you already started in writing in advance. This is intended to be an interrogation of what is reality for our students right now. Not what is our preferred reality, not what is the sugar-coated reality, what is real for our students right now, and how is the administration responding to the reality that our students are facing right now. And so that conversation has to be grounded in what is the data that's being presented, what is the reality there. You'll know that you have really had a sufficiently thorough and rigorous monitoring conversation when all 10 of you, including a student representative as well, when all 10 of you could have someone randomly come up to you at the grocery store with a copy of the monitoring report and ask, hey, what is this about? And what's the district doing in response? And that you would be able to fully answer that question. And so when you feel like you have that level of mastery of the material in the monitoring report, that generally means that you've had a sufficient monitoring conversation, that you understand strategically what has taken place, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what is likely to come next in response to what's worked and what hasn't worked. So those are the things that you really want to focus the time on. I'll be here and available, so certainly you can ask questions, or if you want to follow up afterwards for one-on-one coaching, I'm happy to work with you all. Excited to see the continued quality of the work. Thanks for having me as always.
Thanks, Mr. Crable. So as I turn to board members for questions, just a reminder that we are going to, it's best if we spend more time on looking at the data backwards, looking backwards at the data, saying, what did we learn from that? And then towards the end of the conversation, we'll move to the forward-headed questions. So do you have any, as far as past focused questions, who, what, why questions? Any? Okay, I'll go to Ms. Sawyer, and then Ms. Shipp, and then Ms. Marshall.
Sure, thank you.
And let's acknowledge Dr. Frank Barnes is fielding questions tonight.
Good evening.
Thank you. So Table 1 shows that Asian and white students have met their 2022 targets, while Black and Hispanic students lag significantly in meeting their targets. What targeted strategies did you employ to serve those populations? Which of those strategies were most or least effective, and how did we know?
Sure. I think like an X-Files question.
Right on cue.
Ultimately, within the framework of our strategic plan 2024 and what will be our goals and guardrails on July 1st is we're monitoring towards progress towards the given annual target. Our goal for this particular measure was to go from, I'm going to go scroll back here, was to go from approximately 47% of our graduates having taken and passed an advanced course and to get to 75% by October 2024. So it's progress towards that 75%, which ultimately tells us how we progress. Within a given school year, we're looking at, because students are enrolled in the courses, we're looking at both the number and percentage of students who have taken and passed the course already, as well as those students who are currently enrolled in the course and are on track to pass, are passing at the moment those data are pulled. That's ultimately how we know. When we last came to you, which was in January 2022, the date that we were in, and I am getting to your question, I'm just giving some context and leading to it, we were at approximately 56% of the students who were in the 12th grade class had taken and passed, and our annual target was 65%. So we had quite a bit of progress to make up. Between that time and the things that we did, and I'll get to your answer of kind of what we did, from January 2022 to April when these data were pulled, we progressed up to 61.5%. So we saw forward progress as a district in the aggregate. In looking at, you pulled exactly on how are students doing, when you look at reported subgroups, our Black and Hispanic students have lower percentages of students taking and passing those courses than their other peers. I'm glad to say, although we still have a great bit of work to do, that it was those subgroups as well as students who reported being of 2 or more races who made the largest gains. This is what we'd like to see in our other measures. All subgroups improving, those who are farthest from target making more growth or more progress, if you will. The things that we did is we have our overall strategy is both, now I'll say this rudely and somewhat crudely, is a supply approach and a demand approach. On the supply side, and how we leverage that is to make sure that we have multiple instruments to get students into those advanced courses. Dual enrollment available at all of our comprehensive high schools and at our middle colleges and early colleges. AP advanced placement, known for that acronym, AP courses at our comprehensive high schools, as well as International Baccalaureate, IB, and what we've added to our menu moving forward is career and technical education courses. The advanced courses would be 300 or 400, which students would have to progress to take, and they would be pointing towards having a concentration if they successfully pass those courses. So one is on the supply side, increasing supply, making sure that no matter the level of concentration of poverty or concentration of affluence, that there are offerings there and present. On the second side is the demand side, which is both a push-in and a pull-in, and that's the strategy we used. Most of these courses, advanced placement or international baccalaureate or Cambridge courses, I almost forgot Cambridge, are year-long courses. So students who are in them come August or September, that's pretty much what we're locked into. Our biggest opportunities for progress are dual enrollment courses. A dual enrollment course being, for our listening audience, a student who is enrolled in one of our high schools but also taking a course at one of our local colleges. So being able to avail ourselves of those things. I can't speak to say that all those students were just urgently enrolled after January. Many of them may have had it on their spring course offerings, if you will, their cards, and said they were going to have that on their schedule, and they finally landed in there in the spring. But one thing that we also did that we said we'd do for this class of 2022 was to be able to provide more academic supports so we'd have fewer failures as we progress forward. Although failures in these courses make up a relatively small percentage of students, sometimes often 3 to 4% maximum across all of the courses in grade 12, we offered immediate supports to those students. I think that was an area of opportunity for us to improve, though, Ms. Sawyer. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not sure I've heard the answer to my question, which is, are there differential strategies for students who in the Black and in schools where there are Black and Hispanic students who have not been as engaged as they should be or could be? Or is it just, the same strategy deployed throughout the entire district? That's what I'm trying to get
I would
at.
say it's the same strategy with different levels of intensity and focus.
Okay. Are there some strategies that are more effective than others?
I think one strategy that we've found that works well, something that's been incorporated in something we've done for the last few years through a partnership with Equal Opportunity Schools, which we've tried to internalize for our school district, is number one is to broaden our definition of who might be ready for extra challenge, as opposed to just relying on just one test score, say the PSAT, which might identify students, to broaden that definition. A second strategy we find it works well, particularly with students who have been historically underserved, is to be able to identify adults in a school who are trusted adults. Students, adults who the students say, I trust that student, and we leverage those trusted adults to push students into those courses and to encourage and use those trusted adults to encourage students to persist in those courses. We use those with all students, but to your question is we try to use it with specific intensity and focus with students who have been historically underserved, but we certainly leverage those resources and strategies with all students.
Okay, so let me see, I've got the list. I've got Ms. Shipp, then Ms. Marshall, then Dr. Jones.
My question, I'm looking on page 2 of this document. We know that 92 grade 12 students were enrolled in college-level courses, but at this time were failing the course. What did we know about those students as they enrolled and entered to support them being successful, about their backgrounds in terms of where their GPAs were, where their, ability to progress in these classes?
Ms. Shipp, I can't speak to these 92 specifically of what we knew about these specific 92 students. What we generally do look at is we look at students' previous preparedness. We do have the measure we talked about as far as identifying students who might have particular potential to do well. And so what we found is the best resource for helping students to do better is to have that constant teacher-to-student interaction. When we look across these 92 aren't concentrated in one single school, but looking across schools. And so this is where you might have a singleton here or a couple here, and we really need to leverage teachers. And that's something that we've been working to say we need to be attentive and focused on how the student's doing. Part of that's also increasing our reporting mechanisms to be able to monitor what we would call a DF report, monitor how students are doing on a daily basis, pulling data from our system Power School, being able to do that specifically for advanced placement courses. That's something that we had to enrich this school year to be able to put more tools in people's hands so we could have that kind of 24-hour lag time data to say how are students doing in a given course.
Okay.
Is that my one question?
Well, do you have a follow-up?
Well, I wanted to follow up with, so you also noted, and this is looking back, that you started sessions for these students to support them, and how early did you start in terms of seeing success? Was it early enough?
No, ma'am, it wasn't early enough. It was in response to the data analysis that we did in January, and what we found is although we stood up a good system, we need to strengthen our communication, both communication between, say, central office and school and home, so that more families are aware of these supports, to be able to encourage their young people to take advantage of them. I think we did a good job planning and responding to the data we saw, but communication has to be an area that we strengthen.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall?
My question is following up on what Ms. Shipp just talked about on page 2, the strategic moves taken, these sessions that were held. Were they how was the attendance in that? And this was a new strategy, I believe.
Yes, ma'am, it was a new strategy, something we did in response to what we were seeing after the initial kind of stock take, if you will, in the progress of the conversation in January. The attendance rates were low. Overall, we were looking at below 5% participation of the students who said they would be interested in those types of opportunities. So given that low participation rate, I would say we need to do a better job of engagement and communication. I think we did a good job of being able to identify sites that could be attractive. We did a good job of identifying teachers who would know their content knowledge and be available after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays and on Saturdays. I think we did a good job in those events. I think we do have to work on communication. I think we also, something we haven't yet had a chance to do, what we would call an after-action review, to ask those students who initially, when surveyed, said they would be interested and didn't come, ask them why they didn't come. I think we can make a lot of assumptions of why they didn't. I think some of those things, like I said, I've mentioned already, but we need to dig more into why were the participation rates so low after we stood this up. I do think we have the benefit of this initial response to be able to say, how do we do this in a more proactive way for the coming school year, starting with first quarter? But I think we did certainly an admirable effort, but in the end, we have to get better.
And Ms. Marshall, I'm going to turn to Mr. Hadaba in a second. He has something to say, but I just want to point out that
That was more of a
that was more of
clarifying.
a tactical,
It was yeah.
clarifying question as opposed to strategy level. So that's my job, got to point that
It's all
out.
right.
Okay, Mr.
Yes,
Hadaba.
thank you, Chairperson Deshay. Just listening to the discussion and just being here on the second day, I was a high school principal in a 3,200 populated high school, very diverse, in Orlando, Florida, 5 years at Lakeview Middle School in Winter Garden, Florida. And to prepare students to do well in AP, IB, it starts in middle school. You have to prepare them there, taking rigorous courses so that they're ready to move to AP and be successful, not be concerned about the challenges in that coursework. I can remember vividly, we would offer students, when I was at the high school, summer programs. You have to get those students in an honors geometry class in summer school as they're coming in as a freshman, and then they'll be taking AP calculus when they're juniors and seniors. So I understand what we're saying here about data and the support, but you got to be willing to prepare before you take an AP class. We got to start earlier. I heard what Ms. Shipp was questioning, and it starts there. And really, it starts back in elementary and setting high expectations for our students. So that's what I'll need to look at with our staff as we go forward. We need to start in middle school, and we know we have challenges with students at third grade reading. All that links together, and that's where we have to work on. So students are ready to take a challenging course at high school, and we'll see an increase in the numbers and success rate when they take the AP exam or IB or dual enrollment classes. But that's what I was hearing people ask and so forth, but that's the real situation. It's a willingness to prepare before you go to a challenging course. You just can't throw children in there and expect them to do well. So that's a challenge for the district. We've got to start earlier and set high expectations. That's listening to the conversation. But thank you so much for giving the overview and your work. But I was just thinking about the real deal in preparing students for those rigorous courses. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
Dr. Jones?
Perhaps it was great that I'm following the superintendent. At the onset of this pandemic, I was able to participate in a virtual, I guess you'd call it certification discussion around IB for one of my middle schools. And we didn't fare very well. Preparation of students is one thing, but where we lost and were soundly chastised for is that we didn't have teachers trained. We don't have teachers trained in IB, in this case, this specific case, and I dare say a lot in AP in Cambridge as well. And these are nationally certified courses. So that is high on the list of, yes, high expectations. I talk about it all the time for students, but we have to have the high expectations for the teachers, highly trained teachers in that area. And we lost a lot of our points in terms of that process of being evaluated.
And point taken. And as a reminder, in these sessions, we're not really here to give advice. We're here to dig into what are you learning from the data,
Yes, and we're learning from the data that we have to have qualified persons
But-
delivering the models as well.
Right.
So, I mean, sometimes we can get so sticky with what you think that we really don't get the depth of the qualitative discussion that we need, Ms. Dashew. So let's not lose sight of that either.
Okay. This is our time to ask, and the superintendent and his staff, their time to answer. Any other questions? Mr. Torres-Munoz?
I want to go over table 1 again and consider that even though we're far from the target, a little bit far, we see an increase on the one column before the last one. And I want to ask what seems to have worked in the time since the last time that this table was presented to us. What's the thing that caused this positive growth in all of the people presented?
Thank you. I think overall, what we're able to discern, it's been a combination of things. I think one is being more attentive in our focus to make sure the students, as they were coming up for their second semester, that we were making sure where there were opportunities for increased enrollments, particularly around grade 12, that we were encouraging and pushing those students in and making sure if they were already registered for those courses, that they were enrolling in those courses. I think a second thing that we've done is to make sure that our teachers, the first line of engagement and support, are engaging the students to make sure if they're monitoring how students are doing on a regular basis, are they having an A, B, C, D, or F, and providing that kind of push and support. One of the things that didn't work as well as we wanted to was to stand up that kind of just-in-time tutoring support. That didn't work as well, not the programming, but the engagement, and we've talked about that here.
All right. Let's switch to some future-focused questions. Ms. Sawyer?
So what strategies do you plan to use to support students who need academic assistance in advanced courses going forward, both those offered on-site and off-site?
When you say off-site,
At CPCC or the courses that are not within our CMS schools?
I think the model that we prepared, which was offering specific after-school type of help, as well as offering things potentially on the weekends, was a good start to kind of offering that kind of just-in-time support in addition to what teachers can offer. I do think we're going to have to explore what happens if students don't have transportation for after school or don't have transportation on the weekends. I think we have to explore, is there a virtual option? But I think the option that we stood up to say, being able to make sure we have prepared, trained teachers to provide that is a good option. One of the challenges with our goals and guardrails is our timeline. What Mr. Hattabaugh, the superintendent, said is exactly right, spot on. You have to begin the work farther upstream than high school. The results are manifesting in high school. They aren't always the results of high school. However, for our 23-24 guardrails and our goals, those are our current sophomores. So everything that Mr. Hattabaugh said, and we're going to have to build out budget investments for, are not necessarily going to show up in our goals and goals for our current 10th graders. Well, next year be 11th graders, and in 23-24 be 12th graders. So we're going to have to build out additional strategies. And I do think we're going to have to talk with students more to find out what we didn't do right around their engagement, to figure out what would be helpful to them if they're struggling. Because to this point, I want to pick on something, not pick on, I want to pull on and build on something that Mr. Hattabaugh said, is that he talked about pushing students in and just hoping that they do well, which hope not being a strategy, is that if we have students who we're encouraging to take those courses, we need to make sure that the teachers have the proper training with the mindset they need, know their content well enough, and know there's extra supports. That may be a bit tactical, but that has to be part of our strategy as we're encouraging students to push themselves, to take on extra challenge, that we meet them in a conducive environment where they feel rewarded for that, even when they may be struggling academically.
Ms. De La Hara, and then Ms. Schitt.
So to follow up on that, I believe we're getting ready tonight to pass a budget this evening that has a direct investment in helping to prepare fifth grade math teachers. professional development to help them give the skills to be better math teachers, to help them to prepare the students, my understanding, to be more successful in middle school math, which then creates that pipeline that I think Mr. Hadabal just described, heading into rigorous work following all the way into high school. Would that be something that would be, that you could comment on, that might be a strategy? I mean, it seems like that is something that we're moving toward, or does that fall out of bounds of where we are?
I think certainly that's one dimension of our strategy, is strengthening our teacher supports and our teacher pipeline work. I think another element that we have is we talked about a summer bridge program for our rising ninth graders, students who are current eighth graders and ninth graders, to help more and more of them be successful in their transition. But the kind of investment in developing the competencies and skills of our teachers is certainly an element of an overall strategy. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
I think one school that we need to look at that has been the beneficiary of our partnership and investments is East Mecklenburg High School. We know that they have an international baccalaureate program there. It's well known and it's been successful. They also have an array of advanced placement courses and dual enrollment courses. So there you have a school that's economically and racially diverse. You have a diversity of options. International baccalaureate, advanced placement, dual enrollment, but you also saw with their involvement with Equal Opportunity Schools, all of a sudden a double-digit percentage point increase when they initiated that relationship in AP enrollments, particularly for Black, Latino, and Latina students, and they've been able to maintain that. We all lost a little bit of ground through the pandemic, but I think those are the kinds of examples we need to continue to learn from.
Ms. Shipp?
Yes, going forward, as we look at the strategy, one that you mentioned on page 3, I think is so critical. What more are we doing to ensure that parents and a significant other is supporting students to know and to enroll in these advanced courses?
We need to be able to flesh out our family engagement and communication strategy. We have different things that we have in place, some raw tools that we can use. One of the things that we've seen work at several schools, Myers Park being one, Independence being another, is actually having those, I'm going to call them future fairs, where they're talking about having parents in, where they're directly inviting and engaging parents to come in. They have everything from JROTC, International Baccalaureate if they have it, as well as career technical education and advanced placement courses. The key thing is we have to invite families to come in. One thing that we know that many of our families who have been historically underserved have students who are academically strong. And too many of our parents, when asked them, they say, do you know how strong your child has been? And they say, no one ever told me how strong they were. We need to make an aggressive invitation both to students and to families to take advantage of the rigor that we're offering. And I don't think it's a negative to say that, but I think we have to build that out. We see that in pockets where and I mentioned 2 pockets where we have that, is to systemically have that as part of our practice as we're going upstream to invite more families in.
Right, because schools also question, high schools don't have all the same type of courses
That's right.
that students are looking for for their interest level to even enroll. So how do we even that playing field and do better? For example, Harding having very few courses, and then you have other schools that do, and how are we serving those students who are looking for a particular advanced placement course that is not there?
And those are things we're going to have to strengthen to make those invitations. I think one thing I don't have an answer for, the team doesn't have an answer for right now, is we have some schools where just the number of students who may be whose grades have exhibited they're prepared for that extra challenge, they're lower in number. However, the research says they still would benefit from being in those courses, and we need to give them that opportunity. And we need to figure out a strategic way to make those invitations, even as students are returning in August, and we're finalizing their schedules. I do think, even though we're in, I'm sorry, Ms. Shipp.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
A part of our normal practice is, although we're creating schedules, that schedule is never fully locked until we get all those students in. So the summer is an opportunity for us to finish those schedules and to review those EOC data, if we have them, to be able to look at pre-ACT data which we have in now, to be able to say where are there opportunities to be able to push students in.
Thank you. That's what I was saying earlier. Thank
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Torres Munoz?
In page 3, you mentioned ensuring the continued provision of at least 10 specified advanced placement courses in every comprehensive high school. What's the plan for doing that? Have we thought about one of how to reaching this goal?
Well, part of that's just is you have to monitor, you have to inspect what you expect, as one former board member said frequently. And so we need to make sure as we're building master schedules in our comprehensive high schools, that at least at this point, there's built in for those 10. Now, we recognize as students turn in their cards for what they might be interested in, there may not be students who are interested in calculus at a particular school. I made that up. I'm sure there's plenty who are interested in Ready. And so we have to support principals in adjusting their schedules because there are multiple needs. But I think part of that's inspecting what we expect and working to use the allotments that we have to make sure that we can maintain that commitment that we had.
And I don't know if I can ask another question.
Pardon?
I don't know if I can ask.
Yeah, you can.
Oh. And what about, like you mentioned, those classes that, like, if students are interested in certain AP classes and they're not in that school, is there any plan for them to still be interested in being in AP, but even though they don't have those courses, like they may be less encouraged to be part of AP because they, let's say they just offer STEM-based AP classes, but they don't want to take something STEM. Is there any plan for doing that, for like offering other courses, like maybe online or something like that?
Mr. Torres Munoz, we're grappling with the key question, which you just said, which was virtual. I think before the pandemic, things like virtual high school, which we have across the state, was a way that we could have used that. And we're grappling with the question strategically, is how fruitful is it to use virtual classes for students who that might not be the best modality for them? So I don't have an answer for you now, but that's a question we're grappling with is, can we leverage where you have, I'll say, lower interest at this school, but higher interest here, and leverage that and have students all sign on virtually? Like I said, before the pandemic, we'd have been like, yes, that's a strategy. We're going to use virtual. Coming out of the pandemic, we're not quite sure if that's going to be the most fruitful strategy, particularly for students who might have been historically underserved in the past. We're going to figure that answer out, but I don't have that answer for you today.
That's fascinating. Well, looking at the strategies for 10th and 11th grade students that you've got on page 3, where can the board help? What can we do to help you? Go bullet by bullet, or you can pick out a few, or?
Well, the very first thing you can do is, after your continuing discussion with the superintendent and with our CFO, Ms. Sheila Surley, is pass our budget and fight for the resources we need. That's one of the first things that you can do. I think a second thing we can do is to be able to help us communicate to our families the importance of being able to take advantage of these kind of extra challenge opportunities as we make these investments. Also, I think share with our community that these are things we're making. Some members of our community may recall decades ago when we made this type of investment and not be fully aware that we're making this investment now. So we need to continue to be able to communicate that this is something that we're doing. I think overall, what you've already done and previous administrations is build a strong relationship with our higher ed partners. It's invaluable that we maintain that opportunity to be able to offer those classes. And I will say that in some instances, we're seeing CPCC professors actually teaching those dual enrollment courses in our brick and mortar buildings. So they're taking a college course that instead of having to get transportation to the main campus or their satellite campus, continue to encourage our CPC partners who are magnificent partners. I think we have one of the leading community colleges in the country right here in our backyard, to encourage them and reward them for partnering with us like that, and to continue to provide those types of supports. Those are 3 things that just came off. Pass our budget. communicate our message, and make sure that we continue to strengthen our relationships that we have. I think certainly our new superintendent, Mr. Hattabaugh, has a wealth of experience in this area. He's going to enrich our thinking. We're going to pull our team and look at how do we get ready for the next year as we're closing out this year and getting ready for the next. We'll bring more things to the table as well.
All right, well, that seems like a good note to move along on. So thank you for pinch hitting, Dr. Barnes. Thank you for all your good work here and to the whole team. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now I am going to turn to Superintendent Hugh Hattabaugh for his first report.
Thank you, Chairperson Deshay. And
Cashew. Cashew like
I'm
cashew.
sorry. All right. And board members, it was great to listen to the discussion that you had regarding the important goals that we have set. And I want to reiterate that it is truly a privilege to return to Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools as the interim superintendent. First, there will not be a superintendent doing a 100-day entry plan with a listening and learning tour. And hearing the dialogue here, we got to get into the weeds here and get things working in the right direction. I have served CMS prior from 2007 to 2012 as an area superintendent for the North Learning Community, chief operating officer, and interim superintendent. I'm very familiar with the challenges of a large urban and diverse school district such as Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. There have been a lot of changes since 2007. There were only 144 schools at that time and only 37 Title I schools. Today, in 2022, CMS is comprised of 180 schools with 85 Title I schools. The CMS Board has established new expectations and direction for the superintendent and CMS staff in the new goals and guardrails, which take effect in the coming school year until 2024. The governance model is student outcomes focused and is the driving force to produce increased student academic achievement. The intent of the model is to ensure essential resources are driven rapidly to the students and schools in greatest need to decrease the achievement gap for our minority students and students in poverty. On my first day yesterday, I met with cabinet members who oversees all services in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And I will say, I really feel good about the transition here because it's great to have smarter people than me in the room. Our most essential department that drives student learning is our academic service team. All other departments support our core business of teaching and learning. I have charged Dr. Condra Ratley, Chief Equity and School Performance Officer, Dr. Matt Hayes, Deputy Superintendent overseeing our academic services, Brian Schultz, the Chief Operation Officer, formerly the Chief Academic Officer for 4 years in CMS, to bring a reorganization of our learning community offices with input from Sheila Shirley, Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Frank Barnes, our Chief Accountability Officer, and Laura Francisco, Associate Superintendent of Human Resources Department. The intent is to expand the number of learning communities utilizing present staff in academic services in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. It will include a line of authority from the superintendent to the schools, a results-driven line with high expectations for results to close the achievement gap. The reorganization of learning community offices will be presented to the board at the end of May for their approval. It may create a little angst and concern with some staff. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Radley have notified the team members in the Academic Services Department of the aforementioned reorganization process. They are outstanding educational leaders with a solid track record over decades of service to CMS, and we need to utilize their strengths in the most effective way to improve academic achievement in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. One of the first questions I asked the board chair and general counsel when called regarding the interim superintendent position was, will I have authority to recommend changes in key personnel that affect student outcomes? The answer was yes. Secondly, we do definitely appreciate the support of the various foundations in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. We cannot close the achievement gap without their continued support. I had an interesting discussion this past weekend with Dr. Monroe Richardson, who is a strong advocate of the Read Charlotte and the A2I initiative, which we began in the middle of the school year, approximately around February, March. I do realize they are supported, and we're very fortunate in CMS to have the support from various foundations, and in that particular initiative, with Belk Foundation being a key contributor. We will begin the 2022-23 school year with original 6 designated elementary schools using the Read Charlotte program. Since one-time federal monies are being used to support the program with combined tutoring, I have requested Dr. Frank Barnes, Chief of Accountability Office, to provide the CMS Board and all stakeholders with data and a comprehensive program evaluation. Anytime you implement any instructional program, you need to be able to answer, did it increase student achievement? Can we sustain it in the future when the federal dollars leave? And can we take it to scale? So that's the discussion we'll have with budget. You can't start pilot programs with federal one-time dollars. We're going to have to ask the county commissioners to support initiatives that they're on board with. We understand students aren't reading at the level they are in the 3rd grade. There's all kind of research, reliable and valid, and I'm sure we could have Dr. Barnes give the board what happens with 3rd graders in the future when they aren't reading at grade level. Lastly, the key drivers to students reaching their maximum potential is very important in the budget discussion that we'll be bringing to the board. You have to have the funds to hire and retain effective and caring teachers in every classroom. We're going to be battling all urban districts across this nation to bring in teachers to this district. If you open the school year up with 500 to 600 vacant teacher positions, we're in trouble. None of this is going to work. So that's number one. We have to have the funds, the hard to hire teachers, ESE, ESL, and then we have a plethora of different coursework. A physics teacher, for instance, I remember I had to go get an engineer who was ready to retire, got him through a credentialing process to get him ready to teach our physics class, because they can make more money working in companies across the country, so it's hard to get them in. So that's number one, and the budget will drive that. Second, we all know great principals in every school is essential. They're really the CEO of their schoolhouse, and they really drive the learning in there every day. We, as the cabinet, we have to support them in their job. And thirdly, we discuss this, is engaged students. They got to be in the seat in the school if they're going to learn, and that's an important factor. And I think sometimes we use the phrase free public education. Ask a property tax owner, all of you around here, look at your property taxes. Corporate America, look at your property taxes. There's nothing free about it. It's an advantage that every child and every parent should ensure that their child's in a seat when the bell rings and they stay the full day. That's a huge factor. And thirdly, of course, is having the parents and guardians that are supportive, and we know that we have community members to help if there is a gap there, to help. We have a lot of people coming in, they're scared to death because they can't speak the language, they can't find a place to live, and we expect the community to step up and help those people. More importantly, the 9 elected board members here have set high expectations with clear direction for their superintendent and staff to increase student achievement, close the achievement gap for our minority students in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And I thank you for the opportunity to serve in this capacity at this time as we do a major transition. You have set the table for us, and it's my job to work with staff to get the job done. And thank you very much.
Thank you, and welcome. So now we're going to move on to public engagement. First, members of the board, at midnight tonight, the application window for membership on the CMS Community Equity Committee will close, and the board will elect up to 20 individuals from the applicant pool at our regular meeting on May 10th. And to everyone who has applied to serve on the Equity Committee, thank you. So next up, we've got our consent agenda. Is there a motion that the board approve the consent agenda items?
Second.
Motion from Ms. Sawyer, second from Ms. Byers-Bailey. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? And that passes 8-0. And I'm going to turn back to you, Mr. Superintendent, for an appointment recognition.
Thank you very much. It's my privilege to bring to the board a recommendation for assistant principal who has served well at Steel Creek Elementary School. She has demonstrated great leadership as assistant principal. She knows the community, she knows the students, she knows the parent community, and we find that with her skill set and her passion to work with that community, that she'll do an outstanding job and serve Steel Creek Elementary School, and that's Tamara Looney. So congratulations to her, and that's who we're bringing to the board this evening.
All right, thank you. Congratulations, Ms. Looney. Okay, now we move on to our one action item tonight, perhaps our most important vote of any year, and that is voting on the board's budget for fiscal year 2022, 2023. And before the board acts, I will turn back to the superintendent to introduce this item and make a recommendation.
Okay, board members and chairperson, as you realize, this is my second day on the job, so I don't think any of you think that I developed this particular budget. I have had the opportunity to work with Sheila Shirley for several years when I was dealing with a reduction in force at the time I was here, and we had to put our heads together quite often, and the lady who reports to her in payroll, Kim Brazel, was tremendous in helping me during that time. So I know the budget process here. I know we have to go across to work with the county commissioners. They're a very important partner, but ultimately, it's the Board of Education that oversees student outcomes, student achievement. That is your charge, and their charge is to provide support to ensure that gets done. In business world, you have to invest to get outcomes. In other words, to make money, you have to make investments. In our case, you have to invest money to get a return in student achievement scores. And can't do it by cutting budgets. It's not going to happen. So I think it's vital that we understand that as we go forward. I just spoke of the fact, the number one issue across the country after dealing with the pandemic, a lot of teachers are burnt completely out. They were having to do virtual, remote learning, and then they were having to do in-class teaching as well. They were burning a candle on both ends. I don't know how they did it. But anyway, I was glad that I was retired at the time that that was occurring. I will say that. But the budget recommendations I feel comfortable with. I've sat with Ms. Shirley, Dr. Matt Hayes, and others as we discussed it and as we roll it out. I feel it's essential, and after coming out of the pandemic, we have students that lost 2 years of good instruction. And I just stated we have to have the students engaged and in the seat with a quality teacher that's going to coach them up. It's not going to happen by wishing and hoping. It's hard work, and I think we have teachers and principals that'll do that. So this is the gas to get us in the tank, and I realized when I had to buy new ties, they were like $39, and I thought of it around, that's a half a tank of gas. So anyway, everything is more costly. You'll see that. Our benefits package that we do not mandate, the state mandates that. Secondly, we have to do a better job. I forgot that the superintendent, we're a flow-through for charter schools, and I've got to sign paychecks for charter schools. And what flows through is a huge dollar amount, and I would let Ms. Shirley answer that to the board. And the public needs to know that, because they're going to look at the budget, and they're going to say, look at all that money. Well, you better understand, we're paying for charter schools in this district. and it's taken a hit. I was looking where are the students in certain areas? They must have went to charter schools. It will continue until we demonstrate that we can get the reading up for third grade students, and people will return because they know that we have quality buildings, we have quality teachers, but the challenges are great that we will have to deal with. This isn't easy. And public schools like Charlotte-Mecklenburg are the ones that will lift up communities and ensure that people will be successful in the future, and they'll be the hires getting quality jobs here in Charlotte, and that's what corporate wants, is people that can read technical manuals, adjust to the changing climate immediately, and you can't do it if you can't read, you can't compute, you can't do math. You got to do all those well. And there's jobs that will be coming out in the next 5 years. We don't even know what they're going to be because things are changing so rapidly. So the budget that's coming forward is one that I would hope that the county commissioners understand the challenges we're faced with. We're putting that behind us. It's a new day, and we're going to move ahead. So at this time, Ms. Shirley, you can provide the board an overview.
Okay. Good evening. Glad to be with you tonight, bringing our budget recommendation to you for approval. It will become our budget request that would actually be submitted to the county commission next month. So tonight's budget is the culmination of many, many months of team collaboration through our focus area teams that you all know were comprised of cross-functional departments and school-based staff, deliberations by our cabinet team as we evaluated what they recommended in terms of the strategies and the actions that we would take, the tactics, as well as the new investments. We had that task of trying to determine what those highest priority investments were as a cabinet team. Then we took that to the community. We got feedback from staff. We've had multiple work sessions with this board to get your feedback and input on what you've seen so far. And so this is not going to be anything new. What you see tonight is really going to be a review of our process and our final budget that's being presented to you to share. So where we are going. We've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating. It really is critical that we recognize that when students leave CMS, we want them to be equipped to further their education or their career, and not just to thrive, but also to serve, not to thrive only, but to be successful. Students, we want to make sure that CMS does a really good job, excellent job of providing equity of opportunity for all of our students, particularly for our Black and Hispanic students, so that we can address the persistent achievement gap. To accomplish this, we know that our resources must be targeted to those goals that have been established and focused on student outcomes. That's what this entire meeting tonight has been about, and I don't want you to think that that has been lost on us. This budget does this by first and foremost, we looked at our existing resources and aligned those resources initially. Then we identified those, and when those initial resources, our existing resources, both in terms of time and money. So one of the things that when you look at realignments that are done, that's just the money portion of it. But there's also been lots and lots of discussion about how our staff time is going to be realigned. After we looked at our existing resources, we then made the decision about how we would leverage our one-time existing COVID resources in order to address the learning loss that has occurred as a result of the pandemic. So how we move forward. So the board set 4 goals to be achieved by 2024, and then also set guardrails for the superintendent to adhere to as those goals are pursued. Our team refers to these as our wildly important goals, because you know we love acronyms. I'm looking for my friend. But we actually borrowed this one from the 4 disciplines of execution, and we can have a lot of fun with talking about our weeks all day. But these goals and guardrails were used as our strategic focus for our focus area teams and ultimately our cabinet conversations, ensuring that alignment of our new investments and our existing resources were toward those achievement of those goals. So the next several slides are going to be familiar because we've shared these many times. We've talked about them. We've updated them along this budget journey. And as you recall, each focus area team identified strategies, tactics, and new investments that were identified as the priorities in alignment with those goals and guardrails. And I'm not going to go into all the detail again tonight because we've covered that in multiple past sessions, but I want it to be very clear that the goals and guardrails did influence and guide our budget prioritization discussions. Great teaching was our first focus area team. Followed and closely connected with great teaching is our staffing focus area team, obviously focused on strategies to recruit and retain and support our staff. In our last budget discussion, we used this view to illustrate how we believe these new investments that were either lifted up as a part of that team or in connection with that team's work to align to the specific goals and will impact our progress towards achieving these targets. So, as an example, the increase in the teacher local supplement pay, the market adjustment for teacher assistants, and our critical pay and recruitment bonuses for secondary math and science and our EC teachers, you can see how we have determined that that is aligned to these goals and specifically the goals. Then access to great teaching. The teacher professional development support, you'll notice very targeted towards high school math, 5th grade PD, praxis support for our teachers, the teacher leader pathway, and the instructional leader professional development that was a part of our request. Support for English learners. Added L teacher positions will allow us to reduce that teacher-student ratio in the early grades. And the PACE Academy that we are planning to open next year will provide additional support for our newcomer students. In our academic focus area, academic performance focus area, their outlined strategies, tactics, and investments support a more comprehensive and deeper implementation of our multi-tiered system of support and what we call MTSS. When we evaluated how the various components of MTSS implementation and the use of the new platform will impact our student outcomes, it was determined that it really impacts a number of the goals across the board. Our advanced coursework, you just had a presentation and discussion on that, a very deep discussion. You can see that each of these investments that were identified, whether it's the college and career coaches to help provide support on the ground with students who are contemplating taking those classes, helping that come together, finding those students, putting the right resources. I think Dr. Barnes mentioned finding a trusted adult in the school. All of those things can provide that support through that college and career coach. The early college high school at CPCC, that's our first early college with our partnership with CPCC. The multimedia campaign, talking about making sure that folks are aware, students are aware, families are aware of these opportunities that exist. All of these around the advanced coursework, and you can see that those were deemed to align to ensuring that our high school students receive an endorsement. We know that student engagement and social and emotional support for students is key. We've been talking about that for a number of years. And this team has identified those strategies and tactics and the new investments that are needed to provide that support. There are a couple of new ideas this year, the Family Connect tool, for example, but there's also a continuing focus on adding those SEL positions, our social and emotional learning support staff. That's been a priority for this board and our community over the past 5 to 6 years. There's 2 areas of investments that are included in our budget ask that are not directly aligned to the 4 academic goals, but we absolutely believe that they create those conditions for an optimal learning environment in our school. We discussed these in detail at our last work session, so I won't go into detail. So what did we realign? As part of the budget deliberations, the team recognized that in order to be laser focused on these 4 goals and the guardrails, that we absolutely needed to realign some of our existing resources towards the achievement of them. All areas were asked to make cuts so that the funds could be realigned to higher priorities and to be intentional about making strategic decisions on about how our staff use time. As I said before, staff time is our largest and most valuable resource in the business that we're in. So some of those realignments that we made include the central office administration and support, as well as trade positions and operations were trimmed and reduced. Vacant teacher-level positions were realigned to help offset adding those L teachers, or English learner positions. HR reduced overtime by moving to a virtual career platform, which actually has turned out to be very successful. Building Services is committed to employ strategies to reduce overtime and custodial services in other areas as needed. Extended employment for staff that work during the summer to work on curriculum revisions and things of that nature. Even augmentations to our ELA and math curriculum resources outside of the target grade levels will not occur this summer. We made those reductions so that we could reinvest in other professional development. Pre-K coaches and central office arts teachers won't be working extended time. PD related to the arts mentor program was paused, and training for content specialists was reduced. But you saw these investments and these reductions, or being realignments, I'll call them, in order to provide those PD things that I just mentioned that are much more targeted and narrowly focused on the goals and the guardrail areas, as well as instructional leaders' support for that. Printing reduced for workshop materials. We've realized that one thing the pandemic did provide is everyone is more technology savvy. And so we've obviously been able to find ways to be more efficient and reduce printing in those areas. And computer equipment, both personal devices and classroom technology, have been reduced slightly, knowing that we've just done significant investments in those areas and that a delay in the refresh can be sustained, especially if alternative sources are not available. So on the next slide, you'll see the summary of the new initiatives by funding source. I think this is helpful to see the view of our request for the portion that's being requested of the county, and similarly, how we are leveraging our COVID-related funding to the maximum extent possible for these new investments when the expense or the investment is allowable or suitable for one-time funding. The realignments of the current resources in the county column, you can see the $6.4 million we just discussed, as well as reallocating the unbudgeted federal COVID funding of $41.6 million, means that we've reallocated $48 million of existing resources that have been targeted for these strategic investments. Now, granted, the $41 million of federal COVID funds, you may recall we received those ARP funding acknowledgments or awards late last fiscal year. And so we wanted to be deliberate and talk about how we could best utilize those resources, and have done that throughout this budget process. So we've now beginning to remove some of those revenues from unbudgeted, and we'll be utilizing those towards these investments that have been identified. We believe these investments will support our efforts to holistically address our student needs and a progress in achieving the targets, the goals, and guardrails. I mentioned our COVID-related funding. I have to say, my mantra as a CFO is always to remind folks that there will be an eventual funding cliff, and that we don't want to put ourselves in an untenable financial situation as this funding comes to a close over the next 2 years. But make no mistake, we recognize what a gift this is, and we recognize that these funds are a unique opportunity to make significant investments in strategies that we believe will help students recover learning loss and improve outcomes. Just a reminder that this budget proposal does include the $332 million in COVID one-time funding that's available to use between now and 2024, and that depends on the actual source. For example, the CRISA funding, as we call it, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations, I call it CRISA, totals $72.3 million, and that source actually has to be expended by June of 2023, or September of 2023, excuse me. The ARP, or American Rescue Plan funds, make up the balance of our COVID, $234 million. And you'll notice at the bottom of the chart, you can see how those resources are spread over 23 and 24. And at the bottom of the chart on the left, you can see that there's $14.2 million still remaining in funds available for future use, so that we can, as we identify future needs, we will be able to address that over the next year or so. So now I'm going to transition specifically to the county budget request. Just speak to what our request really entails. We were asking for resources to move our teacher pay to the highest in the state by increasing our local supplement so that we can attract and retain great teacher talent, to provide the salary and benefit increases that have been approved by the state budget, open and staff 2 brand-new schools, and to cover the charter school increase pass-through payments, to maintain our facilities, and then also to support the strategic investments that are not allowed or appropriate on the COVID-related funding. In our sustaining operations, we have the additional resource officers as well as the contracted increase. I do want to mention that we've made one edit to this budget proposal since we presented in March, and that was that we actually removed from our sustaining operations the positions, the DSS and the mental health positions that were totaled to $609,000. After discussions with the county, it was determined that we would continue to have those positions funded in the same manner as they had been previously. So that it was contract reimbursement basis, and so that has been removed from our budget proposal. The investments in our employees, we've talked about. The state-driven salary increases, this is obviously for the county-funded staff. The market-driven adjustments for our teacher assistants, our local supplement pay increase, and then the state-mandated health and retirement increases. All of these being the county component. Student growth and additional space, as I mentioned, the charter enrollment, as well as the 2 new schools. That's both for staffing and the operating costs. And then we've covered the program expansion and the new initiatives. We've reviewed that earlier as a part of the strategic investments by funding source, but this is obviously the county portion only. Drawing your attention again to the total being 11.3, we did identify 6.4 million in realignments. So the total request is 4.9 million for the program expansion and new initiatives from the county. So in summary, our requested increase of the county is 40.4 million as an increase for a total county appropriation of 578.4 million. It's probably worth noting that about half of this request is for things that we must pay for, whether it's the state-approved increases, the salary and benefits associated with that, whether it's the new schools that we are going to need to staff and operate, and the charter school pass-through. For those 3 things alone, it is more than half of this request. But then the remainder of the request does cover those things that we have identified as priorities. Desperately needed increases for our TAs, a local supplement increase so that we can ensure, yes, this will actually, unless they follow, our competitors, we would like to be 5 to 10% higher on our local supplement so that we would have the greatest chance of being the most competitive recruiting place, and have, the new graduates, when they are looking for a new job, sometimes $1,000 can make a difference in them choosing to come to CMS. And we also want to reward and retain those staff that we have with us already. And then the preventive maintenance increase as a part of the ongoing budget is the other item. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who has worked so diligently to prepare this budget. My colleagues on cabinet, the cross-functional focus area teams, my excellent financial support team, and to this board for all of your hours of engagement and support and inquisitive nature about this request. I really do appreciate that. And with that, I would ask that you approve this budget proposal.
All right. Well, before we move to the vote, do any board, and I'm going to go around to see if anyone has questions or feedback. And I want to acknowledge and echo what Ms. Shirley said. We've all put in hours and hours and hours reviewing and building this budget. So thank you for all your questions and feedback thus far. I'm not doing time limits on this portion of the budget, on this portion of the meeting. And with that, just kind of going to do a check to see if you have any last-minute things that you want to say or ask. And I see, Ms. Byers-Bailey, that you do.
Ms. Shirley, I just want to thank you. I know this has been a lot of hard, diligent, detailed work. I cannot imagine the number of hours it has taken you and your staff to comb through all of the needs that we have and all the resources that have been offered us via COVID to come up with this excellent budget that you have prepared for us, to maximize what we have before us in terms of the needs that our students have and how to get them where they need to be. Thank you.
Ms. Schiff?
I also wanted to say thank you as well, and I know this was hours and hours of work, and I can see in this the thoughtfulness and the difference we really know and hope this will make for our children. And I'm always concerned about teachers, because they make the difference. So I can continue to say, as much as we've done here, I could still want more when it comes to that classroom, to the teachers, class sizes being large. We need those teachers, teacher assistants. So this is a good budget. Of course, we always want more. When it comes to academic achievement, we need more. We need all we can do for children. But I thank you for this budget, and I clearly understand where we are at this time right now and why we're here. And as we've looked at the COVID funding, as well as what we're asking from the county. Thank you.
Mr. Strain?
Hi, thanks for pulling this together, and thanks for all the work that you all have done in looking at this budget and identifying the areas of our goals that it is believed that staff will impact as a result of this budget. I think the thing that comes to mind is looking from the perspective of the goals. What happens if the $40.4 million incremental ask doesn't get approved, either by this board or fully funded by the county? And really, there's two ways to ask that, right? How does that advance our goals? And you've identified the mapping to the goals, but how much will the goals advance? And if it's not approved and it was held flat, then how much possibly would it recede, right? In terms of our ability to serve our kids and advance the goals that we've defined. I'm not sure there's a crisp answer to that question tonight, but those are the things that I've asked over the last couple of months with the development of this, and I certainly appreciate the mapping here to those goals to understand, and as we take this forward to the county, to articulate the extent to which we are actually advancing our goals, our stated goals, as a result of this budget. If anybody wants to take a swing at it, that's great, but I've kind of put a bow on it and said, let's think about that a little more as we have the conversation. One other thing I would ask is if there are any other areas. I had an employee suggest one today, said, what are we doing with our contact tracers? So obviously, as we went past our last surge and moved from a pandemic to an endemic of sorts, I think we still have a contract for hundreds of contact tracers. Those are areas that these are resources that we could potentially deploy elsewhere. And those are opportunities to continue to reallocate as you've identified areas in the event that, the job there has more or less been wrapped up and moved forward. So just to continue to iterate on that, that may or may not be an area But certainly to continue to iterate on that and look to redeploy and reallocate those resources, whether they are individuals or headcount, toward advancing our goals. Thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
I can answer the contact tracer question. The current staff that are in our schools are through a partnership with Mecklenburg County Public Health. So they're actually funding those. We're looking at whether or not we'll continue any of that work through the summer and perhaps next school year. But they aren't contact tracers anymore because we aren't contact tracing. So they're doing other school COVID-related things. Testing continues as necessary, vaccine clinics, testing, drive-throughs. So manning the isolation room, there's still duties and responsibilities there, but they are no longer contact tracers. But the funding is not through CMS.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. That was the only part of the answer that I knew, but I knew she knew all about what they were doing.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Sawyer, then Marshall, then De La Hara.
Thank you. And I appreciate that we have a supplement increase in our budget, and I think we need to remember that it's not only that, we need to pay our teachers in a competitive way so that they will come here, but also that they can afford to live in Mecklenburg County, because the cost of living, the cost of rentals has skyrocketed, and I want our staff to be able to live in the county that they work in. And this supplement will help in that. The other question I have might be a longer-term question in terms of how our budget has changed over time. I know folks often compare like per pupil expenses year over year, but I believe those per pupil expenses include things like health insurance and pension and all those expenses. And so sometimes people say, well, the cost of living has only gone up 2% or 5% over these years. But it's my sense that the costs of health insurance,
The cost of employing.
the cost of employing those people, the health insurance, the pension, has often gone up double digits a year. And I think it would be helpful to reveal that chunk of money in the per pupil expenditure that drives that cost up. But while it sounds like we're spending more per pupil in real money in a classroom, we're really not. That's money that is baked into the system that supports our employees but doesn't drive student outcomes. So I think there's an inflation factor there that we might want to reveal in an overt way to help the public understand how those numbers change over time. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
That might be a good story for one of the reporters in the room to dive into. All right. Ms. Marshall.
I know that what we have here, and we have a lot of data to go through, both in the budget book and obviously this printout, some of that's going to appear before our county partners in terms of a presentation, and then there'll be other types of presentations. I know that we really want to let them know what we're doing with our low-performing schools, because that's been a constant conversation and a valid conversation. And I think that so many of these goals that we have put forward really do relate to all that. So it might be helpful for us all to see actual totals of what these new investments are for those low-performing schools and really kind of how they really affect that. And I don't know if that's if that's something we can break out, and we can talk more about that later, because there are just lots of ways to present how we're really particularly touching these students who have the greatest, frankly, academic need after the pandemic, in particular our youngest students. So we can talk more about that, but I think the mapping that we've done, to Mr. Strain's point, is really helpful for everyone to see how important these investments are, because I know that some investments were not put forth because they did not line up with this, and that's real important for us to communicate as well. So I think this is really wonderful, and I am particularly excited about so many of our investments in our English language learners, because we really are going to need to advance that work. So I've hit my 60 seconds, so thank you.
There's no time limit.
Oh, okay.
I was just saying they're our future.
Future, yeah. I thought yeah, you've got your timer and you're working on that one, which is great. Thanks.
All right, Ms. De La Hara.
I think actually we did, though, send a list, if I recall, just to piggyback on your comments, Ms. Marshall, on May 28th of last year, of all of our student-weighted staffing positions that would be cut with that $81 million cut. So I think that data is there, you know, how the extra positions, the equity funding, and how the county funds the extra positions to support our specific low-performing schools is available, so maybe we can just pull that back out again. I wanted to say to Mr. Superintendent, welcome, and thank you in your introduction, just 2 days in, of mentioning how you've already been able to see that we have tied our goals and guardrails, strategically aligning our budget to that work and recognizing the importance of that, and also highlighting the pass-throughs that are mandatory, which Ms. Shirley articulated even greater, but I appreciate that you're already up to speed on that and have a deep understanding, because those are absolutely mandatory that we have to pay. And even acknowledging charters and how that's mandatory. We have no choice by laws but to pay that. And I know a lot of people think, well, the money just follows the child, and that's the way it should be. And I guess, you know, in theory, I just want to state this, that yes, that's true, but also charters, by the mere nature of the way that they function, many of them not offering free lunch and transportation and services like that, they pull out different segments of the population and don't serve some of our most needy residents in our community. You know, one of the litmus tests I give for charter schools when they are talking about the diversity that they represent is I ask them how many Afghan refugees and how many unaccompanied minors that just fled Central America and transversed all of Mexico that they are serving. And many times their answer is no, not often, not always, but many times. And those are the students that we have the pleasure to serve. So I just want to mention that, because along with that means extra challenges around English language learner services, extra challenges around meeting our mental health supports, because some of these students are arriving to us with trauma. And I don't say that because that's a burden to us in any way. No, it's a joy to be able to serve all students that come our way, but it is what differentiates us and propels us to offer particular services that sometimes other schools by default just don't. So I think that's really important for us to have an understanding of how that works in our community. I'm also very pleased that we're making strategic investments for our English language learners. So I wanted to lift that up. I know you already did, Ms. Marshall, but I think that's really important. And we've seen from recent advocacy as well in the community that I think we are hearing and responding to the community and to the needs of our students. I appreciate the extra SEL positions that we are investing in. I think that's really important. And then, of course, Ms. Sawyer already commented on teacher pay, and I think several did, and why that would be important with the teacher supplement. I think in one of the previous meetings I mentioned I might like it to be a little bit more. There was some comments shared that, you know, the 10% increase was a good step in the right direction, and maybe our funding partners might only choose to fund that and not fund the other new initiatives. And we certainly don't want that to be the case, because the new initiatives, from what I'm really seeing when you break it down, when you're not counting the pass-throughs, it's really just $11 million. That's what I'm reading on the screen when you pull out all of the mandatory pass-throughs. So I really do hope that we'll get our budget fully funded this year, knowing that that net number is really just around 11 million, and unless if you take out the 6 million that you've realigned. So well done on presenting a tight budget that we can come together, hopefully as a whole community, to rally around what our teachers and our students deserve. So thank you.
Anyone else before we call the vote? Okay. Ms. Marshall, I will turn to you to make this motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the 2022-23 proposed operating budget and the capital outlay and enterprise fund budgets as outlined in the attached resolution entitled Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education Budget Resolution for year 2022-2023.
All right, do we have a second? Second. Lots of seconds, but I heard Ms. Sawyer first. Would you like to speak to your motion,
I
Ms.
think
Marshall?
we've all commented on the work that certainly has gone into this, but the work doesn't mean anything if we can't advance academic achievement. And I know everyone in the county is very worried about that, and we are the most concerned, and we have the most ability to impact that. So all systems go. This will put the gas in our tank, as Superintendent Hadabaugh indicated a minute ago. Gas is going up in price, so we know that, but we need that gas to make this happen. Thank you.
Any other discussion or debate? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please let it be known by a show of hands. Any opposed? And that passes 8-0. Okay. And there's no other business, so our meeting is adjourned.